I'm Anita Mumm.
And I'm LeRoy, and we're here to answer questions about the publishing industry that were submitted to the conference coalition.
Right, our first question is one that is probably on everybody's mind, and it's how has COVID affected publishing, or how does it continue to affect?
I'm going to speak from my perspective and my perspective only, but I am serving as a senior acquisitions editor for Crooked Lane Books, and I am both surprised and glad that things are proceeding at normal pace. I'm still getting plenty of submissions from agents, which would lead me to believe that they're also reading things. Publishers are putting out books. I think, like society at large, there's a lot of unknowns. There are a lot of questions, but people do seem to be sticking to the course, that they realize how important books and words and story are. So if I were an author and I was working on a book, I would not feel like things are doomed or that you're writing in vain. I would just keep plowing ahead as you had intended to do. And when we get through this, we'll all be looking forward to reading your book.
Yeah, I would just add that one of the benefits of how long, sometimes we talk about how long it takes from a book deal to the book actually being in everyone's hands, and we're wishing that would go a little faster, but it actually could be an advantage now where agents are looking for their next big thing that's going to come out, hopefully after things have started to return to normal. So I think there's a lot of optimism there. I would also say that if you want to keep up with what's going on in publishing, there are a lot of great resources for that, including individual agent blogs. Publishers Weekly is great. There's also a good site called Shelf Awareness, which it's a website and a newsletter, and they have two branches. One is for readers and the other is for people in the publishing industry. So you can, on one hand, you can get a feel for you can read about the cool books that are coming out now. And then you can also read about statistics of, like how book sales were down in March, but are rebounding now. Agents talking about how they see the changes that are happening, advice they have, things they're looking for, things they're excited about. So it's a really great way to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on. And one other positive thing that I've been thinking a lot about is that, well, I live in small town Colorado, so I might not be able to attend as many events as I would like to on a regular basis, but now I'm able to be an author's groupie at a bookstore in Minnesota, or wherever they might be. So I think it's allowing for a lot of flexibility and creativity that, that's probably one of the positive things that will come out of this, is that we're being forced into new ways of marketing and getting the word out for books, but it's happening.
We're using technology perfectly in an imperfect time. Next question. What role does a freelance editor play in today's publishing marketplace?
Well, there are two main tracks. One is if you're planning to self-publish, it can be beneficial and essential to have, you're basically forming your own publishing team and your own publishing house almost. So going through the process as if you were at a publisher and not skipping any of those steps. So having your manuscript edited, having it, getting a professional cover design, copy editing, proofreading, all of that is really essential so that you're putting out the same quality of book as you would if you were doing traditional publishing. People also ask, so if I want to do traditional publishing, why would I need an editor in that, a freelance editor in that process? And the answer is you may not. If you have a polished, high quality manuscript and you have spent time growing your craft, and it's ready to go and you've got a good query letter, you send it to an agent, they like what they see. That's the ideal process, of course. And if it helps if you have a good critique group, beta readers that you trust, you can get a long ways with all of those things. I think a lot of times authors come to us when they have reached a point of frustration. So they sent their manuscript to agents and didn't get the answer they were hoping for. So they're like, okay, what do I need to work on here? Am I just not hitting the market right? Or is it a question of my craft, or is there something about the story that's not working? And a lot of times, I guess I think of our job as being kind of a bridge between the writer and their work and the agent or the publishing house that's going to do the book deal. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would first say that I agree with you as far as how an editor can be helpful to somebody who's self-publishing and somebody who is going in a more traditional way. And I would also agree that people do not need to feel bullied into hiring a freelance editor. It's very possible that you won't need one as a writer, and that's okay, that you have plenty of resources around you. I would say that a third way that editors can be helpful, and one that I personally find rewarding, is working with people who are just getting started writing. They've maybe had an idea about a book they want to write. They might have taken writing classes 20 years ago in college, but this is a pastime, a hobby, a career, a profession that has a lot of sometimes confusing and intimidating language surrounding it and concepts that aren't inherently simple. So I'd like to be able to sit next to someone who is just discovering their voice and their writing process and be able to explain things like show, don't tell, or how to properly use speech tags, all of these things that maybe are the sort of learned knowledge of all authors when they get to a certain point, but are things that you must learn at some point. So I enjoy working with authors who are just starting out with things.
I remember in the past you've called that, it's like an in-person MFA or a portable MFA.
I've always said that I want to start a no residency, non-accredited MFA program where I can spend a lot of time with people and helping them develop their book and their process. And for me, one of the things that's most important is being able to talk about how writing and story is based on, in some part, lived in experience, and that it's very important that we see the world and try to perceive it from as many points of view as we can to figure out what the core story is. So yeah, someday I'm going to be offering a no residency, non-accredited MFA program.
Okay, our next question is, how extensive are the average revisions after a book is signed for a publishing deal? And what's the general time frame from deal signing to publication?
Okay, so I'm going to speak in generalities because no two projects are the same. It is probably assumed at this point that if a book has been acquired by a publishing house, it's in pretty good shape. I know, or that I've heard stories from days of publishing past where people may have taken a book that was not quite as far along and spent much more time editing it. I think a reality of the publishing industry now is that by the time something lands on a publisher's desk, it's in pretty good shape. It's already gone through an agent who has done what they can to make the book the best they can to pass it along. The process can be a matter of weeks where it's just an editorial letter has been presented to the author goes back to the manuscript, looks at things, makes some changes, hands it back, everyone's happy, things go on. Or it could last longer. I mean, it could last months where there are some larger philosophical conversations, there are some foundational examinations of the book. It's important for a writer to remember that the editor is their ally, that the editor is working to make this the best book that he or she can, because this is a product that the publishing house is going to be putting out. They want it to be successful. So there are times when things might feel adversarial, they might feel confrontational, but they're not. And you should also know that there are plenty of comments in an editorial letter or in a marked up manuscript that are subject to discussion and debate, and not just the editor telling you these things have to be changed. It's more of a, you should consider these things. As far as the timeline for how long it goes between a book being accepted at a publishing house and being on a shelf somewhere, typically, again, 12 to 18 months is a pretty standard goal, and that allows for the revision process that we've talked about. But it also allows the publicity and marketing team to produce galley copies that they can send out to reviewers. The sales team has to go and visit bookstores, attend regional conferences and national conferences to say, hey, these are the big important books that we're putting out this year. Please pay attention. And all of those timelines, the ordering, the sales, the sending out review copies, those all have to happen months in advance of the book's actual publication. And so on one hand, it may be frustrating because you're like, the book's done and I want people to read it. But for it to have its best chance to find as wide of an audience as possible, it does take time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've always been curious about the process when, like, if an author signs a 2-book deal or it's a deal for a series, their first book is obviously going to be pretty polished when you see it because it's what got them the deal. But as they go into the series, do you sometimes work with them earlier in the process, like helping to shape the plot, or maybe they send you an earlier draft that's not quite the same level of polish, just out of that nervousness of deadlines and everything that comes up with the second book? How does that look on your end?
You're pretty spot on. Sometimes I'll get a few paragraphs of an outline of where they're thinking about going, and we'll high five each other and be like, this is going to be such a great book, and we're really excited. But then there is the whole process of writing, and there is the pressure of deadlines, and there's never a pressure of deadline on a first book like there is on subsequent books in a series, because the first book, you have all of your life to write it and then you turn it over. But the second book, a publisher might be looking to, for continuity's sake, put it out in a year. And so the timeline gets crunched. And I have definitely received books that have been passed off to me as if they were full drafts of a second novel that have been a little bit sparse and thin. And that's part of the process. And it's one of those roles that an editor has to play, where it goes from being the person who's marking up the book to the person who is cheering on the writer, because writers will sometimes feel doubtful that they can make a deadline, or they'll feel just so stressed out that they can't concentrate on actually writing. We work through it. We get through it. There's, there have been times too where books have been delayed a little bit, but yeah, I get a front row seat to the thought process of the author from idea to finished book in a way that probably not many editors do for a first book. Next question. How often do people make the move from being self-published to traditionally published?
Well, it definitely does happen. I had a front row seat to a really cool example of it when I worked at Nelson Agency. Many of you have probably read Wool by Hugh Howey or heard of it. And that was a case where it was sort of an underground phenomenon, selling a lot of copies, really amazing story. And so that made getting a book deal and getting an agent and a book deal, it made sense. I've also seen cases where an author might have only sold a pretty low number of copies on their first book, but then they get a breakout idea and they get an agent for their second book idea. I guess the thing to watch out for with that is if you're going to query about your book that you've self-published or another one, only mention the sales numbers if they're actually impressive. So I used to read submissions in the slush pile that would say, my book has sold 250 copies, and instead of being impressed, that's an automatic strike against you. So it needs to be, more than a few thousand copies. It's got to be impressive numbers to really, or else, you don't want to mention that part.
If I can jump in for a second, I think that that's a really important factor to consider as people are making the decision between which route they want to take when it comes to publishing, because there are times when you are done with your book and you definitely want readers and you definitely want to get it out into the marketplace, and the querying process is taking a long time, or maybe you've gotten some rejections from agents or a publishing house, and you decide to self-publish. And if you don't have a lot of success, like a Hugh Howey situation, sometimes I have had authors who have queried and said, hey, I self-published this, but now I want to find a different home for it. And like you said, if there wasn't a significant sales track record, it's really hard to get permission to publish that book, even if you feel good about it as an editor. The problem is that as soon as you put an ISBN on something and it's for sale, BookScan is tracking how many sales of a book are happening. And BookScan is not 100% accurate. It's the best guess that people in the publishing industry have as far as how many copies of a book sold. And there are definitely numbers that publishers are looking at that you need to hit certain thresholds. And if you're not there, it is really difficult to get internal support. The other thing to keep in mind is that one of the best tools that a publisher and an agent has for drumming up interest in a book is to be able to say that something is a debut novel. And as soon as you put out a book, there's no going back to having a debut novel. So a second book from an author who might have had a not great experience with the first book, it's even harder to get approval there, because you can't use the debut marketing status, which is really something that reviewers pay attention to. It's something that booksellers pay attention to. Everyone wants to get in the ground floor and be a fan of the new literary hit, and that becomes problematic.
All right, I think we're down to our last question. Ben, you wear a lot of hats these days as an editor and work in a lot of different situations with authors. What is your favorite part of the job that kind of unites everything?
Great question. I think for me, this is the selfish answer and putting myself in the center of it, but I am desperate to understand the human condition. And I have found in my life that books and words and storytelling are the most direct way for me to better understand the people around me and the world around me. And it has been invaluable to expanding my horizons in a variety of ways. I think that writers write to be heard and readers read to feel less alone, and to be any part of that process is an absolute blessing to me. It's joy, and there's nothing that I love more than sitting with an author for weeks, months, until I know that they feel like what they've written is exactly what they wanted to say, and that it's ready to be shared with the world. And knowing that I was a part of that on some small level is great. How about you? What's your favorite part of the job?
Yeah, I think Something kind of similar. I always enjoy the part where, like, I've worked with an author for an extended period of time and we've been through their manuscript. They've received my feedback. And then we have a conversation either in person or on Zoom or over the phone. And it's a chance to um, brainstorm back and forth, to hear their reactions to the feedback, to hear their ideas, to just go back and forth on the problem solving and the create. It's a chance for me to watch the creative process in action, to see
Yeah.
how a writer's mind works, and how, you had all these puzzle pieces that you were working with, and all of a sudden one of them just falls into place while you're talking, and it is just super cool to see that happen, and just to, like you said, just to be a part of that process, and to be able to experience that energy. I would say that's my favorite part.
All right. Well, I think that's it. We hope that this has been helpful and that your questions have been answered. And we look forward to seeing you all in person in the future.
All right, stay safe and well, and happy writing.
Bye, everybody.